Welcome to our presentation today. We're going to talk about balancing the budget in 2014. This is Connor Belcher, and this is also going to be presented by Ian, Sarah, and Nick Strybeck. So, going into the presentation, we're also going to talk about balancing the budget. But first and foremost, before we get to the meat of the presentation, we need a solid understanding of these terms that are listed. Budget. Well, that's one of the main terms we have to know is the estimate of income and expenditure for a set period of time. So in our government, we have different areas that we spend money to, and whatever the money's income or spending for a certain period of time. So in the United States, it's our spending for over a year, or how much we make income for that year. Budget deficit is a status of financial health which expenditures exceed revenue, or in other words, to simplify it, is our spending is greater than what we make, which is very self-explanatory. We spend more than what we make. Social Security. Well, it's definitely not how secure your social life is. Social Security is any government system that provides monetary assistance to people with inadequate or no income. So people that are retired, people that have very low income, that are poor, they will get Social Security checks from the government, which is practically their only source of income. Medicare and Medicaid, they're different. Medicare is a health insurance program for people who are 65 years or older. They also can be younger people with disabilities, like mental disabilities, physical disabilities, stuff like that. They receive Medicare. Medicaid is this health insurance program helps with low-income individuals or families which pay the cost for associated for long-term medical and custodial care, provided that if they qualify to receive Medicaid. So that's Medicaid. So moving on into the problem. Why do we have a budget deficit? First and foremost, we need to look at the historical of why it's gone there. First, the most important part is the Clinton era, in which it was very successful in the Clinton era. When he was in office from 1993 to 2000, he improved the gross domestic product, the GDP percentage of the deficit and surplus went from minus 4% to almost 4%, which is a very huge increase. Which what Clinton did in that era, he increased the tax for the rich and some other programs. So that caused the economy to grow from minus 4% to 4% in that certain category. Now, after Clinton was released from office from his second term, George W. Bush took over office. Now things started to get crazy. When Bush took over, our budget pretty much started to go downhill. He cut taxes from the rich, and he increased military spending. The military spending is coming from the terrorist attacks from September 11, 2001, which he acted in this going to a war in the Middle East, or the war as known as the War on Terror. That caused our GDP to decrease very rapidly during his years of office. And then going on, Obama took office in 2008, in which he started in a situation where it's already hairy and it's all very, very complicated. So when Obama took over, he started spending very heavily, causing our budget to go $1.3 trillion. In which beforehand I'll state that, and the graphs are on the next slides. But Obama spent it heavily in Medicare, Medicaid, or Obamacare, military, foreign aid, etc. In this graph, in this picture, we have sort of our Titanic model of the boat is represented as the U.S. economy heading towards the iceberg, which the top part, which what we see is the budget deficit, and on the bottom is the debt. So it hits the iceberg. It causes our budget to go downhill. Or actually, our economy to go downhill, which represents the ship sinking into the ocean. So that is that. All right, here's some pictures. This is where this is the graph of tax rates versus the federal debt, and as you can see, there's a very in proportional relationship where cutting the taxes on the people that are rich causes the federal debt to increase. So back in 1910, interestingly, they taxed pretty high on the rich. So as time progressed over the years, up till when Clinton took office, we started to experience a little federal debt. As you can see, a slope of the increase of the graph. Now, when Clinton took office in 1993, he increases the tax on the rich, which flattened out the debt a little bit, but it improved a slight bit to where we had a positive gross GDP percentage, but it wasn't great. But it did make improvements. Then after that, when Bush took office, when Bush took office, he cut taxes on the rich again. They cut taxes on the rich again, and that sharply increased the federal debt up to a whopping over $12 billion. Another main focus of what the Bush administration did was increase military spending, or known as defense spending since 2001. Like I said earlier, we had a lot of major conflict in the Middle East with the war on terror. So that enacted Bush to spend heavily on military, sending troops there, provide military equipment, aircraft, naval craft, you name it. He's spending on tanks, whatever, weapons, you name it. So over a period of time, we spend more and more and more money towards the military. And eventually, when Obama took office, he continued to spend heavily on military since we were still acting in the Middle East with the war on terror. Now here, this is a graph of the percentage of GDP. Now, GDP is our way to measure growth in the economy. It's the most common measure to measure growth in the economy. Through before Clinton, it was like a roller coaster ride, but you can see the trends decreased more and it decreased more just a little bit, but it was more like a roller coaster ride. But when Clinton took office in 1993, you see a nice increase from -4% to almost 4% as percentage of GDP from a federal surplus in this case. When Bush took over, like I mentioned again, he cut taxes on the rich, he increased military spending, which are the two main things he did while he was in office. That caused the percentage of GDP to decrease, and that's been responsible to our deficit because we were spending more than receiving. When Obama took office in 2008, there's a very, very rapid decrease of growth because of his tendency to spend money on a lot of areas in our budget, and we didn't experience many income from all that. One more graph to show to you. Obama had a $1.3 trillion budget deficit, which is the most in all time, versus where Bush only spent 250, which is in relative it's still relatively bad, but it wasn't as bad as Obama. So you can say Obama made the budget deficit a little worse in terms of spending.